It's great to have all of you here this afternoon. It's a special day for us to have Congressman Ami Bera with us, even though it's a short trip, but he's made time to be with us, so we're really, really grateful. I'd leave the formal introduction to Ambassador Ronen Sen, but Ambassador Sen, we are so privileged for you to chair this session for us. Thank you so much, and without wasting any more time, over to you.
Thank you, Kiran. Thank you, and I want to thank Kiran and also our colleagues in the Aspen Group for organizing this get-together with such short notice. And it's a privilege to welcome Dr. Ami Bera in our midst. I think all of you know his, he doesn't really need any introduction, but it's his life has been quite remarkable in a sense of he's been entirely dedicated to public service, and he's come up the hard way. He's completely a self-made man. I mean, he did his bachelor's and he got his medical degree, and again we're working part-time, and then and also availing of some scholarships, which are obviously based on his merit. And he's repaid that many times over in terms of public service, both as a medical practitioner, as an educator. He was, and finally in doing something which is quite extraordinary in terms of the Indian American community that is taking a deep plunge into politics and emerging successful against a very formidable entrenched incumbent in the 7th district in California. And I think a number of people here, you're aware of California, and it's where the 7th district is located, just to east of Sacramento. And it's quite remarkable that it's a very diverse congressional district. Absolutely. Very vibrant as it is diverse. And he got elected there, and as I said, against formidable odds, because he got a widespread support, because the Indian American community there is just barely 1% of his constituency. So without further ado, I think if you permit me, and would you like to say something to begin with?
Sure, absolutely.
Or before we start our conversation?
First off, thank you for that generous introduction. I want to thank Kiran and the Aspen Institute for this opportunity. You made one comment of being a self-made man. None of us are self-made, and my story starts with my parents, who immigrated from Gujarat, my father in 1958, my mother in 1959. And in many ways, it's the story, it's an Indian story, but it's also a story of the Indian American diaspora. They came here to America just seeking a better life. That's an American story, to build for my two older brothers and myself, to give us an opportunity and a chance. So I've not accomplished anything by myself. I've only able to do what I'm doing because of those that came before me. And that goes back to the 1950s with the first Asian member of Congress, who was also an Indian American, Judge Dalip Singh Sand, also from California. So it's important for us to know, as members of the Indian diaspora, where we came from. That's why it's also important for me to return to India as a United States congressman, because I recognize that this victory is not my victory, but it's something that we should be proud of as the Indian American community, and certainly broadly as the Indian community. So this is an important trip for me, and this is an important relationship to see the full fruition of the partnership between the United States and India, the world's oldest democracy in the United States and the world's largest democracy, particularly in an increasingly complex world, our values of freedom, our values of building for the next generation, our values of being startup people, being innovative people, have the ability of remaking the world. And in many ways, the Indian American community, while only being 1% of the population in the United States, is responsible for 8% of the startups, is responsible for much of the innovation that has powered the last 2 decades of the American economy. And having just visited Bangalore, that culture of innovation that exists in California, in my home district in Sacramento and certainly in Silicon Valley, is very much evident and present here in India as well. So this is a partnership that, to steal a phrase from President Obama, can be the defining strategic partnership in the 21st century.
Yeah, Congressman, you've just spoken about the Indian American community, and I said when I talked about formidable odds, I think there was another factor I'd like to add to that. When I was in the United Kingdom, you have a lesser number of people there of Indian origin, but a greater percentage of the population. But you have about 1.7 million people of Indian origin. But in terms of seeking political office, they had been much more active in terms of you have now 8 members of the House of Commons. You have 22 members in the House of Lords. And even in Germany, and where there are just barely 50,000 people of Indian origin, you have out of a population of about 81 million, 50,000 is absolutely minuscule. You have 2 members of the Bundestag, and one of them chairing the committee on the interior, which is a critical committee, and the other one is deputy chairman of a party, the Greens Party. One is, of course, Social Democrat, the other is Greens. But in the United States, where you have such a vibrant community, not only people, and with an extraordinary, the contributions you've spoken about, and people with the maximum reach in terms of, the number of fellow Americans they come in contact with, like, doctors like you,
yeah.
Entrepreneurs, you've spoken about startups. It's across the board, but hospitality sector. But in terms of, and that's where I'm very interested in knowing, and if you can share with us, that people don't turn up, not enough people turn up to vote. At national levels, at state levels, at local levels. How did you, and what motivated you to get into it and take the plunge?
So I have been privileged to be able to do a number of different things. Answering your first question, it's quite accurate that the Indian American community, for all of our strides, we're now the most affluent community in America. We're the most educated community in America. Has not engaged politically. And some of that is, I think, just by the very nature of being a young community. For my generation, the first generation that was born and raised in the United States, it was go become a doctor, go become an engineer. So we've been focused on making those strides of building some security and establishing ourselves as a community in America. Again, I'm the first generation, having been born and raised in America. But when I look at that generation right behind me in their 20s and 30s, this will become commonplace. My sense is within the next decade, I would hope that there are 4 or 5 members of Congress, and this starts to happen. My success is predicated, though, on those values that I was raised with as an Indian American, those values of family, those values of having the security of community.
Congressman, you mentioned these values, and they're vitally important for us, and there's so much that we share. The other aspects, India, between India and California, of course, the United States is such, very strong people-to-people links, and across the board, and considering that California is, if it was It's among the 10th largest, it's the 9th, within the first 10 anyway.
Right.
Always been the largest economies in the world. Considering that.
The 8th largest economy now.
8th largest now, right, okay. So considering that, I mean, when you have a trade turnover of just about 6.5 billion, it seems to be small, even in comparison with our total trade in goods and services worth, I think, about 100 billion. And apart from obviously, and you have representatives here from some of the companies, California companies, you have, I mean, exports from there, from California, in computer and electronics, of course, and manufactured goods, and agriculture also.
Right.
And I remember in agriculture, the pioneering role. I mean, people remember Norman Borlaug and his role, and in terms of the Green Revolution in India. But not many people know about the role which we had in other agricultural areas, like grape cultivation. From UC Davis, where you had taught, and of in USDA in Fremont. So what do you think in terms of how do you develop those things?
The reason why I am so optimistic about the relationship and the potential of the partnership between the United States and India is because we've only scratched the surface of trade. We touched on the grape industry. There's a ripe market for my home institution, UC Davis, and for California to help India develop its wine industry. There's in some of the conversations we've had around agriculture, India has a mature agricultural sector, but around issues of storage and food waste, we're doing some innovative things in my home district at UC Davis on the issue of cold storage. We've worked through some logistics on supply chain, moving goods to market. So these are natural win-win opportunities. Obviously, on the issue of technology, on the Silicon Valley, and working with India, we've seen maturation there. I think the sky's the limit here. I mean, we've gone from 20 billion in trade to 100 billion. Vice President Biden has said, it's time to go from 100 billion to 500 billion. And those are the opportunities that exist.
Right, and I think, Congressman, I think, I just wanted to mention also, I mean, all of you know that the Congressman is a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and also the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. Some of the issues, some in those areas where we are actually collaborating, and we can collaborate much more. And on subcommittee research, among other things, but also, I mean, you're looking after also the subcommittees in Asia Pacific, and on Africa, and global health and human rights.
Well, certainly let's talk about the geopolitical partnership that exists as well. We've had conversations, within committee when Secretary Kerry came. My question to the Secretary was, as we look at Afghanistan in the post-2014 world, there's a unique opportunity here for a U.S. and India strategic partnership. And India has a critical role in holding on to the gains and giving Afghanistan a best shot at success. But India can't do it alone. This is a partnership with the United States, and we both have a vested interest in success here. India, to its credit, has for a decade been making strategic investments in helping build infrastructure in Afghanistan. And obviously the United States has made massive investments. As we negotiate the bilateral security agreement, as India has, this starts to define the partnership that we have with India in the post-Afghanistan 2014. As Afghanistan goes through its elections, Now, again, India is the world's biggest democracy. We're the world's oldest democracy. We both have a vested interest in making sure these elections move forward in a very stable way. Again, there's a partnership there. Certainly, as we pivot to Asia, there's we talk about this in our committee quite often. India should be the stable foundation, certainly for Southern Asia and so forth. And that's in both our countries' interests. And a partnership is a partnership where two people are dialoguing together, they're listening to one another, and then they're formulating strategy and moving forward. That's certainly in my role as an Indian American congressman, it is important to make sure this is a partnership.
Right, and you know, you have referred to two major issues, and which concern us also. 2014, when you have the three transitions, one is in terms of the security, with the U.S. and IAS, AF forces, getting out of their combat role, and also the economic transition and the political transition taking place all at the same time. And there are some, I'm sure on this and on the rebalancing towards Asia, we have a number of experts here. Now, would you like to make some general comments before we open up to the...
Sure.
Because, on China, apart from Pakistan, there are some concerns because, both of them are our major neighbors. And we can't see one without viewing the other because in a sense, there have been linkages between the two, whether it's in terms of non-proliferation or
Absolutely.
Across the board.
And how I look at this as one member of Congress is, from the United States perspective, it's not an issue of China or India. In fact, in all of our interests, it's how we have this conversation together, because India has a robust trading relationship with China. We have a robust trading relationship with China. How do we approach this as equal partners in a way that's mutually beneficial? We all have an interest in making sure that Pakistan finds some stability and doesn't become an unstable state. That's in India's interest. That's in the U.S.'s interest. As we look at the, some of the energy concerns, the United States, a decade ago, nobody ever would have thought that we potentially become an energy surplus country. We've made tremendous strides in terms of our energy security. India has real energy needs. How do we take some of what we've learned and identify those areas of unique partnership where we can help India meet some of its energy needs in a strategic way, both in the renewable space, but certainly in shale gas and oil. So if you were to ask me, the partnership looks very bright in the future. And I would go back to a statement that a number of folks have made all the way up to President Obama, that this partnership can be the defining partnership of the 21st century. And the Indian American community has a role in making sure this partnership reaches its full potential, as do all of us in Congress. So,
right.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Thank you. Should we take some questions from the floor now? And, well, Surinder, Ambassador Surinder Kumar.
Excellent.
Congressman, you have been to Afghanistan.
Wait for the mic, please.
You've been to Afghanistan recently, and your
I have.
comments, you also said that Afghanistan offers prospects for India-US strategic partnership. In theory, yes, but as they say, devil in details, because most of the defense analysts in India, you talk to them, they will say India, US are really not on the same page in Afghanistan. US is trying to talk to Taliban. Many defense analysts will feel that after you are gone 2014, perhaps Taliban might be the dominant force of Afghanistan, which is inimical to India. It's Pakistan who get benefited. Right. So I don't know whether in practical sense, whether we really have a scope partnership or we have many more causes of concern.
So I can speak as one member of Congress. From my perspective, I've been consistent that India has a critical role in stability of Afghanistan, and that a whole-scale withdrawal is not in the interest of the U.S. to maintain some stability there. Part of the purpose of this trip is to have this dialogue, to get a better understanding of how India is viewing 2014 in Afghanistan. From my perspective, we should be talking about this because, again, India's made significant investments in creating some infrastructure in Pakistan or in Afghanistan. And the U.S. has made significant investments. We should be approaching this in a partnership because it's in our strategic interests. Now, within my role on the Foreign Affairs Committee, I will continue to advocate and make the case that it's in our interest to have this conversation, particularly before we get to December 2014, so that we're making decisions as partners. I'll continue to advocate that. The best way I can be effective is with my colleagues in Congress, and I think we've successfully had some letters put together asking Secretary Kerry to define India's role in Afghanistan as well. So.
Yeah, please. First, let me say that any follow-up questions on Afghanistan? Huh? Yeah, please.
Yes,
Sorry.
it's good to see you.
Yeah.
A couple of months ago, and this question which relates to Afghanistan, is there a roadmap being developed for this trilateral US-India, Afghanistan relationship? Because in the absence of that, won't be able to take specific action, though we've had a few meetings here with, on this trilateral kind of an arrangement. But I don't see that developing it, in the larger US-India engagement towards Afghanistan.
Certainly it's clear to me from the Indian perspective that dialogue is not taking place. So one message that I'll take back as I go back to the United States and back to Congress is the importance of having that dialogue and that conversation early as opposed to late. And I understand Indian industry has resources that are available and that they want to continue to invest in Afghanistan, but certainly there has to be some assurances of some level of security. So what I've heard loud and clear, and I will take back with me, is the importance of making sure that conversation is taking place and that India is a partner in this conversation and that there's an understanding of the Indian perspective.
Right. Yes, Ambassador Shukla, on Afghanistan.
Thanks. I have several questions. Do I confine myself here to Afghanistan only?
We can, I think after Afghanistan, then we can move on to the other issue.
Okay, issue by issue, right.
Okay.
Thanks. Right. Yeah, my name is Prabhat Shukla. I'm a retired Foreign Service officer. My last assignment was as ambassador to Russia. I'm now working at a think tank called the Vivekananda International Foundation. And my throat, as you can see, is in very bad shape.
As is mine.
Yeah, I noticed you also. You had a soother in your pocket. I don't. Good on you. Okay. Now, on Afghanistan, there is one other issue which we have been grappling with, which is the question of access. Simple contiguity. On the map, we do have, but a very difficult terrain at the best of times. But the reality is we don't. Now, we've been trying to develop an alternative through Iran. You're obviously familiar with this. But we run into a wall because America is applying very heavy pressure to cut our links with Iran. Is there any way of squaring this circle? Thank you.
From my perspective, as it pertains to Iran, the biggest concern and the biggest worry is the acquisition of nuclear weapons in Iran, because that sets off an arms race in the Middle East at a time where things are very unstable there. My sense is on the day that Iran acquires nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia will get them immediately from Pakistan. So the one tool that we have to avoid that and continue to apply pressure are the sanctions. And I think all the members of Congress, as well as the administration, are unified in our desire to send a strong message to the Iranian regime that this is not an option, that they should reconsider that. And certainly nuclear energy is fine, but the acquisition of nuclear weapons is not an option because it'll send us in the wrong direction. India, to its credit, has been winding down and purchasing its energies from other areas, and we applaud that. On the issue of transportation, on the issue of energy pipelines and so forth, I think that's a longer term discussion because obviously India has energy needs that you force itself to look to see where it can purchase that energy. I think we should have an alternative conversation. As the U.S. makes strides in unleashing some of our reserves, newly discovered reserves, there's no reason why we can't take some of that technology. I have to imagine there's shale oil here in India. I have to imagine there's some offshore reserves and so forth. How do we help India unlock its energy potential as well? So,
Yeah, sorry.
So,
Huh?
but the main. Well, so it's in our interest to see those pipelines and so forth. We access Afghanistan, though, and create those transportation rights by actually having a dialogue about this. And Pakistan plays a role here as well in terms of some of the movements of goods and services through Afghanistan. So.
Yeah, just a comment. Yeah, please.
Not on Afghanistan.
Please.
Are we done with Afghanistan?
No, then I think if you can bring the mic back over here, yeah, and then we go back to you, because he's asked a question long time back. Yeah, thank you.
I'm Arvinder Brara, Chairman and Managing Director of Mantech Consultants. Taking on from what Ambassador Ronan said, what can be done to encourage more Indian Americans to be in Congress and in the Senate? I think you're right that they are more focused on their professions and business. But I think it'll help not only us as Indians, but also America, because I think you have a lot of intellectual capital there. So there should be some kind of motivation or efforts done to encourage this.
I think it was important for the Indian American community to see me get elected, because they had to believe that it was possible. And a number of individuals have run over the last decade and have not been successful. So the first step was to see that we could get elected, especially in a district that is less than 1% Indian American, running on who I am. So now that the door's open, it's my obligation, as well as the entire community's obligation, to identify those leaders within our community and support those leaders, because the more representation that we get, the more we are able to address and understand the issues, both from America's perspectives, but also based on our background, India's perspectives as well. I also think the broader Indian American community needs to get more politically engaged as well, so they can weigh in and help shape some of the decisions in America.
Yes, yeah, please. Back to the gentleman.
My name's Ajay Shukta. I write for a paper called The Business Standard. There's a sense that we get from a lot of people who we talk to in Washington that the Indian embassy there does a good job of engaging the State Department, the Pentagon, the White House, and so on, but not such a good job in engaging the Hill, individual congressmen, and so on. The last person who did a good job on that is sitting on your left, I'm told. This is what we hear. What's your perception? What's the perception on the Hill, and how can this be improved?
Yeah, so my perception may not be the same as everyone else, because the Indian American community, the embassy, Indian industries are constantly engaging our office based on who I am. So I would think that we're having constant, robust dialogue. That said, and I'm going to broaden the question here, I don't know that we've done enough to engage the broader congressional community. We can go back to the Bush administration on the U.S.-India civil nuclear deal. There was broad congressional engagement. We still have the largest country caucus, being the U.S.-India caucus, that has the biggest membership of members of Congress. But we need to identify that unifying value that we want to accomplish in the U.S.-India relationship. We also need to educate members of Congress on why this partnership is so important, both for our economic growth in the United States, but also for our geopolitical stability. And it's quite obvious to me why this partnership is so important, but we need to make sure other members of Congress understand the importance of this partnership. We also need to make sure other members of Congress understand India and experience India. So, what I'm getting this week, listening directly to foreign policy experts and the folks that are thinking about this, I need to make sure my colleagues are hearing this as well. So, and having this direct interaction.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Ronnie Mullen. I'm a U.S. academic, and I'm based here in Delhi this year with a Fulbright Nehru Fellowship to research the Indian-Afghan relationship. And so I have a question with regard, actually a specific question on Afghanistan and a more general one on our foreign policy to South Asia. On Afghanistan, it was in the papers today, there were several articles that India cannot provide security hardware to Afghanistan because of end-user agreements. And I'm wondering if there's any thinking in the U.S., specifically in our Defense Department, on that it might be in our interest, in fact, to loosen some of these end-user agreements for hardware that's sold to India in order for India to be able to share this with Afghanistan. So a specific question there. And then my more general question on our foreign policy towards India and South Asia. I was surprised. I had some talks in Washington this summer with people at think tanks and was told we are no longer talking about a pivot to Asia, but a rebalance towards Asia. And indeed, my sense from what's coming out of the State Department with our foreign policy largely revolved on a revolving door policy on the Middle East that is really neglecting Asia. So I'm very glad to see you coming here, but a sense, so I'm wondering from your perspective on the Hill, where do you see our South Asia policy when the word, from some quarters at least in Washington, is that it's not as focused on Asia anymore? Thank you.
So 2 questions there. The first question, I think both the United States and India are better served if the United States maintains some of that security presence in Afghanistan until the Afghani people are able to secure their own country. I just think for a wide variety of political reasons, as well as how other members in this neighborhood might perceive others providing that security role. And I think India's role in Afghanistan is largely where they've been focused, which is helping build the infrastructure for the country of Afghanistan to find some stability, helping them build their mining industry, helping them build the agricultural sector, helping build some of the roads and highways. And Indian companies are uniquely suited to do that. So that's where the partnership is. On the rebalance to Asia versus the pivot to Asia, I think when the original pivot was being discussed, nobody had a crystal ball to think about everything that's happened in the last 2 years in North Africa, in the Middle East, particularly in Syria and Egypt. I can't speak for the administration, but I think that's where some of this rebalancing is coming from. That much more of the foreign policy perspective has been pulled over towards the Middle East and how to grapple and make decisions. That said, I do think the defining relationship in the 21st century is going to be this relationship between the U.S. and Asia. Certainly you're seeing that. So I think while temporarily you may see a rebalancing, I think there's going to be much more of a pivot.
Ambassador Shukla.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go into a number of other areas now. The first is, I want to pick up what you said about India and the US having a common interest in the stability of Pakistan. I think at an abstract, theoretical, even practical level, I think we are all agreed on this. The difficulty is that, I've been sitting in on Indo-US dialogues since the mid-90s. And this has been a recurrent theme that we need to work together and work for the stability of Pakistan, etc. But on the ground, the situation just keeps getting worse. And the best judgment we can make is it's not going to get better anytime soon. Now, I'm just wondering if we need also to broaden the Indo-US dialogue to take into account a situation where Pakistan becomes a failed state. Neither of us wants it. Certainly the Pakistanis don't want it. None of their neighbors wants it. And yet it may happen despite the best wishes of all the people involved. I'm just wondering if you think this might be one of the vectors in the dialogue. Point number 2. I'm very glad you made a reference to Vice President Biden's speech. I think it hasn't got enough attention in Delhi, certainly, perhaps because it was made in Mumbai and we are very provincial about these things. But I think, I think he made 3 very important points. One, it's always wrong to bet against America. People like me have been pitching this message very strongly over here, that this whole talk about America's decline is highly, highly overdone. The trouble is that there are lots of people in America who are beating the same drum, and that does make things difficult for us, but we are soldiering on. The second point he makes, which is very, very relevant, I think, again, is that there is no conflict between strategic autonomy and strategic partnership with the US. Again, I think this is a message well worth propagating, and I have just written a piece on this, in fact, giving a lot of solid evidence behind this. Third point, and this is a question, third point is his reference to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I'm wondering if you could tell us something more about it, because I have been, again, a votary of India signing up, initially at least as an observer, which is how I think Canada started, if I'm not mistaken. And then we take it forward. I mean, there are some apprehensions on our side about labor standards, environment, and IPR, and so on. But I think these are nothing that we won't have to face anyway, whether we talk about the WTO or whatever other framework. So could you tell us something more about how you see TPP moving forward, and what kind of thinking is there for India in this regard? Thank you.
Okay, so on the first point, the answer is yes. The US and India should be having a dialogue as it pertains to Pakistan as to how to move forward, but also contingency planning should things go south. And that is a shift. Again, I'll qualify it. I'm speaking as one member of Congress, but to continue with a strategy that has not really led to progress is not a strategy at all. So let's rethink how we approach this, and India should be a partner in rethinking how you move forward, because we both have a vested interest. On the second statement and then the question, absolutely. I would not bet against the United States. We have issues, and we've been focused on our challenges in the last 3 or 4 years. We had a deep recession that deeply impacted the American middle class and American families. And our focus moved inward a bit as well to get through this recovery. We also have our own challenging political environment right now. We're in divided government with an ability to move forward in a comprehensive way. Despite all of that, our economy is recovering. things are starting to look better. People are starting to feel better. There's a resiliency that exists. How we take that, though, so we're not out of the woods in terms of recovery. We can still manufacture something politically that puts us back in a recession. Hopefully we're smarter than that, and we can move past this when we come back in session. But how we don't just recover, but actually get back on this trajectory of acceleration is through trade and economic development. And I think if India were asking me, I think there very much is a role for an India in a Trans-Pacific Partnership. At a minimum, to have some trading agreements between the United States and India. I mean, there's parallel conversations going on with the Asiatic nations and Australia, and then there's the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And I think it would be a shame if the two biggest players here, India and the United States, have two separate treaties, but there's not one that allows them to communicate, because we're dealing with some trade issues right now on both ends and some concerns. We need a mechanism that allows us to resolve these and minimize the concerns of U.S. companies as well as the concerns of Indian companies. Because, again, we've done very well when we've been working together in terms of growing our economy. So, in short, yes, I think India would be well served, and I think the United States would be well served if India was part of the TPP conversations, or short of that, if we were actually having our own bilateral conversation around trade.
Yes, I think, please. Could you speak up a little bit, please?
Sir, my name is Shubhajit Roy. I'm from the Indian Express newspaper. Since India and the US, both share the common values of democracy, I would like to get your view on the US government not giving visa to a democratically elected Chief Minister of Gujarat, Mr. Narendra Modi. And would you think that the US government should reconsider its decision on not giving him a visa? Thank you, sir.
I think, as we've discussed with the State Department, I think Chief Minister Modi, if has that interest, should apply for the visa again. So, I mean, at this juncture, it's a State Department issue. No. I would say if the Chief Minister has the desire to visit, I think he should apply for the visa. So.
Yes, please.
See, the ever-tightening visa regime in the US is adversely affecting the Indian IT industry. Should we take it as a fait accompli, or could something be done about it?
Nothing in U.S. politics is a fait accompli. So, there's the Senate has passed their version of the bill. We don't know how the House leadership, the Republican majority, is going to approach immigration, if they approach it at all. And I think the danger here is if this becomes a political issue, that there's issues on the American side, there's issues on the Indian side. We're going to thrive if we work through this, because Indian companies have helped with job creation and helped with the U.S. economy. So we certainly don't want this to become a political issue. It should, if we can take it out of the realm of politics and just negotiate it, it's beneficial both to India and the United States. So nothing's a fait accompli. And as you know, within India's own democracy, our democracy is an evolving process, and laws are. So, my message to Indian industry would be to tell the story of what they've contributed to America's economy, the number of jobs that Indian companies have helped create in America. So, but we should tell that story.
Yes, yes.
Hi, Congressman. My name is Kunal Dutt, and I represent the Press Trust of India. I have a twin question. Actually, I had two hard questions, but I think I see enough AFPAC darts around you, so I'm going to go with soft questions. The first question is about the Indian American communities in US. How politically inclined you think they are, as in vis-a-vis, let's say, the life in India, where you see every corner, discussing about the politics, whether it's the legislative policy or the larger general elections. How politically inclined do you think the community is there? And secondly, I know Barack Obama has said that 100% security cannot mean 100% privacy. So on the issue of spying, what is your take as a congressman? I mean, would you like your emails to be eavesdropped on? Thank you.
I appreciate the softball questions. Let's take the second question first. A lot happened in the post 9/11 world. Now that we're a decade out, though, we should have this conversation between national security, homeland security, and rights of privacy. So, we've, along with, I want to say close to 150 colleagues in the House of Representatives, have sent a letter to the president saying we should have this conversation. And it should be a public discussion. So we're discussing the balance between national security and privacy. But that's the discussion that should be happening. The first question was, remind me? The Indian American community. I think my parents' generation and the first generation that immigrated here were often focused on Indian politics, first and foremost, and would have vibrant discussions about what was happening in India, while they were deeply focused on becoming successful in America through business, through academics. It's up now that the next generation is rising, the generation that was born and raised and fully see them as having a seat at the table, at the American table. I do think we're going to see this transition where more people are getting engaged in politics and talking about American politics. And from my own experience, when I first worked in Washington, D.C. in 1985, I don't think I saw anyone who looked like me. Today, my chief of staff is an Indian American. You see members in the administration who are Indian American. You see, walk through the halls of Congress, and you see many young Indian Americans. So I just think this is a natural progression, and the community will continue to get more and more involved. I see it as part of my obligation to use my position to engage the broader Indian American community in American politics as well.
Yeah.
I'm Prakash Ambegaonkar, and I'm from Washington, D.C. And I'm very glad you were here. I just found out you were here today.
Thank you.
And I would like to ask a question to you and make a little comment about what I have just heard in the last hour. And I'm fairly active in Washington in U.S.-India relations, as well as U.S.-China relations and India-China relations. What I observed is that the China angle was very important in U.S. equation towards India in the early days. In United States thought of India as a hedge against China. That hope and that particularly has disappeared. But I notice more and more, and it is a good idea, Ami, we tell some things to this audience that gets talked behind the scene and off the record. It's okay to say something publicly and be goody-goody, but the real bottom line is there are a lot of negative currents in the United States towards India. India has become less significant than it was at one time. Now the question is why and all that. And as you can see in the last 1 hour, the whole hyphen we spoke of is India and Pakistan. My hope and my work has been to eliminate that hyphen and create an India-China hyphen. And it happened for a few years. Every TV, every article, every media, India, China was said in the same sentence. It is not happening now. So the thing we have to think of, how much we people, Indian Americans, can do about it, how much needs to be done right here in India itself. And it goes back into economic performance. And a common statement that happens is, who will help India if China attacks India again? And many people say we can count on US. But the US say we won't don't count on you. Because we can count on you when it comes to Afghanistan, when it comes to Iran. So these are some little bit more observations I felt should be understood. Indian Americans, we are doing great, but at the same time, I think we have a lot of limitations, and the real ball stops here, is what I would like to, and maybe you might make a comment on this.
So a comment on India, China, US, China. From the US perspective, we shouldn't look at this as China or India. We should look at it as the relationship with both. And I think the same thing from the Indian perspective. It shouldn't, India has to have a relationship with China, as does it have to have a relationship with the US. I think, and again, a few of us on the Foreign Affairs Committee think there is this critical partnership with India as we look at issues of Southeast Asia and emerging nations in Vietnam, as we look at issues of South China Sea. We have to think to ourselves, as the United States, who are our strategic partners there? Just as India has to think who her strategic partners are. And I would hope that we reach the same conclusion, that it is in the United States' interest and it is in India's interest for both of us to be strategic partners together. I think you're accurate that the relationship that was accelerating forward just 5 years ago has slowed down. Some of that is just because each country is dealing with its own internal political issues and so forth. But as we start to move through some of this and hopefully come back to some normalcy in United States politics, and I think as India moves through its own elections and so forth, my hope would be that we then recover and gain some of that momentum and gain some of that dialogue. I know intentionally that is a focus that I'm certainly working on. I think it is a focus that the Indian American community should be working on as well. The Indian American community has not used its clout to the extent possible, and I think that the broader community certainly should, with the desire to grow this relationship, this partnership with India. If India is attacked, certainly the Indian American community has a concern about that.
Thank you very much, Congressman. I think we've covered a very broad spectrum in these discussions today, and I thank you very much for your open and candid and also illuminating questions and giving your perspective. And we all agree that this relationship is vitally important to both of us, and we stress that it's not transactional or tactical, it's long-term and strategic, and that we should keep talking on areas where we feel, and we shouldn't look under the bed or looking for issues as to intentions, but we should keep that dialogue going candidly. Would you have some words to sum up this?
Within this room, we see a broad spectrum of some folks that have been working on the diplomatic issues for years, but I also see a younger generation in here as well. That next generation that has the ability to redefine relationships in the world. The world that I grew up in, the world that many of us who are in our late 40s, early 50s, grew up was a very different world than the one that is emerging today. So we've gone through some of our battles, and we look at the world from one perspective, but I think it's important for us to embrace how the next generation is going to view the world. And the opportunity, again, is huge and incredibly important for us to have this vibrant and strategic relationship, both for each country's economic future and for our geopolitical future. So I'm an optimist. I see the future as bright, and I see this relationship as being a bright one. I see the Indian American community becoming much more politically engaged, and that can only benefit and strengthen the relationship. And I see the next generation, really, you're seeing many more of this reverse migration of Indian American children coming back to rediscover their roots. I think that can only be a positive as well. So I'm optimistic. I think the future's right. We will hit some bumps in the road, but every relationship hits those bumps in the road. Let's learn from those. Let's build on the successes that we have, and learn from the things that don't work out quite as we had expected.
Yeah, Karen.
Thank you so much, Congressman. It's been great to hear you, and it's great to know that we have an Indian American in Congress. The US law says that you have to be US born to be in the White House. So my question to you is, do I need to ask the second half of the question? Yes. So when do we see an Indian American in the White House? When do we see Ami Bera, the president?
Let's focus on making sure we have Ami Bera, the congressman, and let me focus on my re-election. But let me actually capture that question. Yes, I was born in the United States, but my legacy, when people ask me, well, what legacy do you hope to leave behind? My legacy is not measured in what I do. My legacy is measured in what that next generation does. So if my legacy is inspiring, others to run for Congress, and in this next decade we have 4 or 5 Indian American members of Congress, that's a legacy that I want. If in my lifetime we have the first Indian American senator, that's a legacy that I want. And yes, I'd love to see within my lifetime an Indian American president, because our legacy is built on what the next generation accomplishes. So that's my focus.
Thank you so much. Thank you once again.